Let's talk about the typical structure of a research article. Keep in mind that this will be a very general view on the topic and that although there is a fairly standardized formula for the structure of a research paper, there are still several possible variations of it depending on the kind of study being undertaken and where it will be published. Research articles usually consist of 5 main sections: introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. The introduction contains background information related to the study. In other words, it tells the reader what is already known or what has been already done in relation to the subject. This part of the introduction is usually simply called background, and it includes information about available literature on the topic or previous studies, and briefly describes what are the specific things that haven't been investigated before that will be addressed in this particular work. The introduction can also include a statement indicating why the issue or problem being addressed is important. The introduction also includes objectives of the study and/or the research question. Here you have some useful verbs that you can use to state the purpose of your work. Evaluate. Example: this study evaluated the correlation between exposure to cooking fumes by kitchen personnel and the development of respiratory diseases. Assess. Example: we assessed whether kitchen workers exposed to cooking fumes are at a higher risk of developing respiratory diseases. Determine. Example: the aim of the study was to determine whether cooking fumes contribute to the development of respiratory diseases by kitchen workers. Investigate. Example: we investigated the association between exposure to cooking fumes by kitchen workers and the development of respiratory diseases. The methods section describes the context and setting of the study and specifies the study design, data collection instruments, and procedures. In the case of clinical research, this section provides details of the people that were studied, the participants. The way in which these participants were chosen or ruled out must be stated here, along with the measurements taken, such as vital signs, for example. If an intervention was carried out, like medication, advice on lifestyle changes, surgery, and so on, it must also be described in this section. Finally, there is information about the statistical analysis performed. When redacting the methods section, it is important to keep in mind that this part of the paper should provide the readers with sufficient information regarding the study methods to be able to reproduce the study if they desire to do so. The results section, as you might imagine, tells the readers what was found or the findings of the study that relate to the research question. This section will be very factual and it will probably include counts and percentages. Some good advice here is to avoid the temptation of over-demonstrating analytic skills and the abundance of the data set by providing too many tables populated with non-essential results. Focus on what the reader needs to know and what is relevant to answer the research question or meet the objectives of the study. The discussion section states the main findings of the study and, as the name implies, discusses these findings with reference to previous research on the topic. Let's review some important verbs you can use to state these findings. Show. Example: we have shown that exposure to cooking fumes increases respiratory symptoms and reduces lung function capacity. Confirm. Example. Our study confirms the correlation between exposure to cooking fumes by kitchen workers and increased respiratory symptoms such as wheezing, cough, and shortness of breath. Provide evidence. Example, these findings provide strong evidence that there is an association between the exposure to cooking fumes by kitchen personnel and the development of respiratory diseases. If the results do not offer total certainty, we can say suggest. Example, our findings suggest there is a link between exposure to cooking pollutants and the development of chronic respiratory diseases. If the results are negative, we can use the verb fail, like this. The study failed to demonstrate that there is a link between long exposure to cooking fumes and the development of allergic rhinitis. The discussion section should also include practical implications of the results. For example, possible or recommended changes in policies or protocols. Another important thing is to analyze and describe the strengths and weaknesses of the study, and taking that in consideration, offer perspectives and ideas for future work on the subject. This is the section that allows more freedom in its structure and prose, but unfortunately, for the same reason, it is usually the most difficult part to put together and the weakest section of a paper when redacted by inexperienced academic writers. The conclusion, which sometimes is not a section by itself but part of the discussion, is where everything comes together in a logical manner. The conclusion should provide a clear and concise interpretation of the results in a way that emphasizes the importance of the study. At the end of most research articles, there is also a small section called acknowledgements. Here, the author or authors will thank the people or organizations that have assisted or provided resources for the research. Finally, there is a list of references which mentions the books and articles that have been used during the research. As we have discussed here, the typical research paper is a very structured and codified form of writing. Knowledge of the rules, both the explicit and the implied ones, is key to redact a paper that has a real possibility of being accepted in a peer-reviewed journal. Thanks for watching.